So, Claudio, you just presented our house view, our kind of broad idea of where we see the energy system going through 2040. And now I know there's a lot of different elements of that, but I mean, what do you see as the most important takeaway that you want people to have understood about that, to take away?
Thank you for your question, Noah. I think it can be encapsulated in one sentence, which is what we've been saying for the past at least 2 years, which is the energy transition is accelerating. But we added an extremely important qualifier there, amid oil and gas resilience. So this is an unmistakable trend. The role of these two energy sources will not diminish in the next 15 years. Actually, it will increase, albeit maybe marginally, but it will continue to increase. That is, I think, the way I would describe it.
Okay. And now, obviously on stage you don't have time to get to necessarily everything that you want to say. I mean, what was maybe something that you didn't get a chance to talk about with the audience?
I wish I had something like 3 hours to explain all the house view. It probably takes 3 hours. But so there are, I think that the 10 kind of key takeaways are there. So it's, the accelerating transition, the role of electricity, the fact that the system becomes much more efficient already in the next 15 years, right? What I only scratched the surface on were the macro trends. And the reason why they are so important is that we think of energy demand as laymen, we think of energy demand as kind of exogenous, but it's very tightly intertwined with the economy. Mm-hmm. So if you plot the chart of global GDP and the global demand growth, they basically are in lockstep for the past 40 years. And the economy is an exogenous variable. Therefore, if there is a recession or if there is a boom, then of course this is going to have a reverberation on the energy. This is the stuff that I am going to focus more on in the next few months, and I'm going to put more on that into the future house view. Today, we focused on two key trends. One was the aging of the population, global aging of the population, global urbanization. These are kind of going in opposite direction when it comes to energy demand, and then the role of protectionism.
Well, as a chief economist, I'm not surprised that you would say the macroeconomy is going to be one factor we really need to pay attention to. I'm really interested in OPEC because certainly the group can take different decisions, different strategies. Are they a wild card in our house view? I mean, how do we see OPEC and their strategies evolving?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, because I didn't speak about the role of OPEC. And as a matter of fact, in terms of house view, we are analyzing this right now, because right now, the next thing we do for the house view is house view supply and prices. What I presented today was the house view demand, right? But it's obvious that OPEC plus, by the way, not just OPEC,
True.
is going to affect the cost of oil and the primary cost of oil, obviously, this year and next. So what we have said is that the renewables are winning the battles in the marketplace. The reason is that they are cheaper, they compete, they are competitive against fossil fuel. That's why solar PV are picking up so much. And that's why EVs also are picking up in many places around the world. But we have lived through a high oil price environment, also natural gas, due to the disruption in Ukraine and so on and so forth, right? So clearly, from a market perspective, oil and gas have become very expensive in the past 3 years. Oil will not be that expensive next year. And the reason is that OPEC has unwound 2.5 million barrels a day, 2.6 million barrels a day of production, and that will hit the inventories in the next few months. And once you are in a growing inventory environment, prices will decline. So it's possible. I'm not saying it's nothing is certain, obviously, right? But the underlying macro trend is that next year the market will be oversupplied, which means it can flip into contango, which means prices are probably going to be below 60. Unless we have all this disruption that we just saw in the past week, right? So Venezuela, the confrontation between Venezuela and the United States, Ukraine keeps on targeting oil facility in Russia, right? So that this is having an impact. And of course the Middle East, right, with the missiles in Doha. So these are keeping right now the oil prices up. But the underlying trend, if you remove the geopolitical aspect, then next year prices are going to be lower than this year.
And this is a strategic shift from OPEC, you're saying?
I would argue it's a strategic shift. I would argue it's mainly driven by Saudi Arabia. There is a market share concern that they want to address. But I think that the secondary consideration is that a lower oil price eventually slow down, at least for the time being, the transition to other sources of energy.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to talk about kind of where we see oil demand peaking, plateauing. How do we see that curve forming over the next sort of 15 years or so?
Yes, it's very good because this is a recurrent topic. Every time I come to the summit, they ask me every year, so when is oil demand peaking? So I think it's fitting that we're addressing this today. And the reason is that we spent a lot of our brains in modeling oil demand, everything else, but oil demand in particular. And we are pretty confident in saying that we will see a slowdown in the rate of growth in the next 4 to 5 years. Therefore, by the early 30s, it's unlikely that we're going to see oil demand growing. But it's also unlikely that we're going to see declining. So what I call it is not so much a peak, I call it a plateau. A long plateau at around 105, and then probably towards the 2040, which is the end of our house view horizon, well, oil demand will still be above 100 million barrels per day. So this gives you a little bit the dimension, right? So when's the first time that when in the history that we were consuming 100 million barrels a day? It was 2017. So you see that we will still live in an oil world, right, in the next 15 years.
So not so much the peak, it's that area underneath that plateau.
Yes.
Well, Claudio, thank you so much for joining us here on the Debrief, and I look forward to speaking with you at the summit next year.
Yes, absolutely.